Cilantro, you guys call it coriander. This is an amazing plant. Eat lots of cilantro for a lot of reasons. But the few that I can give you that really are important, that have been medically proven, is it contains a compound in there called dodecanol. And dodecanol has been, according to the University of California, found to be twice as effective as the antibiotic gentamicin in killing salmonella. Dodecanol. And they think that probably explains why the people who live south of the border, who eat lots of salsa, never get the Montezuma's revenge that the gringos get when they go down there to visit, because they put what? Coriander in all their salsa, lots of it. The other thing about coriander is it's a very, very effective heavy metal chelator. And that's important because all of us have these, what I call anti-nutrients in our system, which are these heavy metals, namely mercury. If you have fillings in your teeth, you probably have mercury. We're all ingesting mercury every day. Someone estimates in the United States at least a microgram a day. Lead, aluminum, arsenic, antimony, these are all metals that you need to get out because they're quite suppressive. They're very immunosuppressive, and they also interfere with the other elements like zinc or iodine or selenium that are involved with a whole cascade of things important for the immune system. And this has been proven by the Heart Research Foundation in New York City. You can actually buy a cilantro extract, but eat it. You grow it down here. I've seen it down here. Eat lots of it every day. Does anybody not like cilantro? There's got to be somebody who doesn't like cilantro. Really? Everybody? You don't like cilantro. Okay, some people don't like it. And in your case, if you want to deal with heavy metals, eat chlorella algae as a supplement. Chlorella algae is a wonderful heavy metal decontaminant. Wonderful. Yes?
Question, so like some of these herbs we quite often buy the dried preps instead of using the fresh herbs.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the cilantro. The cilantro that, first of all, I love cilantro, so I could eat, pounds of it fresh. But when I'm on the road or when I'm just in a hurry and I just use it every day just because I'm trying to get heavy metal removal up, I take a cilantro extract, which is made from steeping the cilantro like in a tincture. And I take drops of that, in water. Now that's like a medicine. It's not nearly as fun as eating cilantro. As far as the dried herbs, I'm not sure. I would imagine you can get some benefit. I don't know about the dodecanol. I don't know whether the dodecanol is active. Some things become less active as they get dried, but I don't know. I don't know that. What's that stand for? What's another word for salicylic acid? Aspirin. Isn't everybody encouraged to take aspirin for your heart, to thin out your thick, tarry blood? Right? And yet, there's a risk with taking aspirin, isn't there? What's the risk for taking aspirin? Bleeding. Ulcers. H. pylori seems to be very much associated. H. pylori is what? Heliobacter pylori is associated with the ulcer, the bacterium, and there's a definite connection between steroidal, what do you call it? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which include ibuprofen, Tylenol, aspirin, and all the other prescription medications for pain seem to make the problem worse, if not create it outright. Salicylic acid found in foods, however, are loaded in fruits and vegetables. And the reason why, again, is plants make it or manufacture it for senescence, which is what? What's another word? What is senescence relative to plants? Senescence is premature death. It keeps the plants alive. It's like an antioxidant, if you will. Insect and disease protection. So again, like the antioxidant pigments, that's why it's made by the plant. Anti-clotting, anti-inflammatory without side effects of stroke. That's another thing you can get from aspirin. Organic vegetables have 6 times more salicylic acid than non-organic vegetables. and contributes to lowering CRP. What CRP stand for? C-reactive protein, which is this inflammatory protein that they're finding in high-risk cardiovascular candidates that they say the Mediterranean diet is responsible. It's the fruits and the vegetables. Here's your salicylic acid-rich fruits, and look at the ones that show up again. The dark pigmented ones. Look at all the berries up there. And then when you go to the vegetables, look what shows up again. Oops, sorry. Some of the cruciferous family, like radishes and broccoli. You got the squashes in there, the zucchini and the other winter squashes that you call pumpkins. The tomatoes. And eggs, the other villainized food that will kill you dead. One egg. Now they got everybody eating egg beaters or throw the yolk away, eat only the white. Can you imagine that? Primary source of essential fatty acids if you're not a seafood eater or you can't get seafood like, some places in the world, they don't have seafood. Particularly the indigenous cultures that don't have grocery stores. So nature provides a way. What's nice about it, it's got that ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, ideally in a perfect egg, 1-to-1. It's rich in those EPA DHAs, we call it landlubber salmon. It's got cholesterol, yay! Exclamation point. It's got cysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione, fat-soluble vitamins A, vitamin E. It's got lecithin, which is what? A fat blood solubilizer or emulsifier. And it's got this wonderful B vitamin cousin called choline, which helps detoxify the liver. Yes?
How does it compare between battery eggs and sort of free-range eggs that are getting a fair bit of green pigment like that?
There you are. The concentration camp egg. The concentration camp egg is on the right. And the free-range omega egg is on the left. This is University of Nebraska. Now, look on in red. That's the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Here it's 2.6-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. Look at the concentration camp egg, 13-to-1. Then go to DHA, one of the essential fatty acids right here. 100 milligrams, 20. 5-to-1 increase. Vitamin A, 50% increase. In vitamin E, in some cases, 100% increase. There's a lot of food in an egg. One egg. Well, this is a raw egg, but a lot of these fatty acids are going to stay the same. Yeah, you can cook them. I think the best way to eat an egg, if you can stand it, is a soft-boiled egg. Quasi-hard, how about that? Okay, over easy? Come on, Michael. Don't say no, come on. It's got to be what? Got to be dead. Got to be dead, he says. All right, scramble them? Scramble, eat them anyway, what the hell. I eat them. I put them in my smoothie, I don't even know I'm in there. I throw raw eggs in my smoothie, it's a milkshake. I can't even tell there's an egg in it. You won't even notice it. Because I got so many other things in there, you can't taste eggs. But Michael's got a fixation. He knows the egg's in there. And therefore, he's the guy that knows that when the first egg was picked, imagine the first man who saw a chicken lay an egg and decided to eat it. What was going on in his mind? Think about that. Okay. Virgin olive oil. It gets all the wonderful things, and it is. Virgin olive oil is great. I love olive oil. The best way to eat olive oil, though, is drizzle it on food. Don't cook with it. Because it's a monosaturated fat, not a saturated fat. The one thing about saturated fats is they don't oxidize in the container, and they don't oxidize when you heat them up in the frying pan. That's the problem with these cereal fats. Corn oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, canola oil. Any of these oils are polyunsaturated fats. They're very susceptible to oxidation. Oxidation means what? Basically, it's another word for rancidity. Rancid fats cause vascular vessel damage and they're carcinogenic. And they're all omega-6 on top of it all. Throw them out. Get rid of them all. Every one of them. You're going to cook with fat, cook with lard, cook with butter, cook with coconut oil. They're all saturated fats and they're best for you. You want to use, yes? Rapeseed oil? Grapeseed oil. Grape, yeah. It's a high smoking temperature, but it doesn't have some of the benefits of these saturated fats, namely the fat-soluble vitamins. It's not a bad oil. It's actually, it's a pretty good oil in terms of it not smoking or oxidizing in high heat like some of the other oils. And it's got some great antioxidants in it. I don't know if they still stay intact after you heat them up at high temperatures in a skillet. But grapeseed oil has got some really interesting properties to it. I prefer the flavor of lard, coconut oil, and butter to fry in. They got great flavor to food. If you want to flavor your food, that's the stuff you want to use, depending on which flavor you're looking for. I think lard is outrageous. And lard from grass-fed pigs, believe it or not, the second highest source of vitamin D after cod liver oil concentration is the vitamin D you find in lard from pigs that are out on grass. And I remember the old timers used to practically make lard sandwiches. But this stuff is wonderful. I mean, it's got these compounds in here. It's got squalene that protects the heart. It's got these phytosterols. As far as it's got very little omega-6, 10%. And it's oleic acid, monosaturated 75%. That's what we call omega-9. So it's kind of neutral when you're dealing with the omega-6 due to the omega-3 concerns. It's omega-9. So it doesn't really upset the balance or help the balance either way, except that you're not adding to the 6 problem. And then one of my very favorites, which you guys can get down here, this stuff is amazing. This is a very healing oil. Your kind of oil. This is great for the skin, and eat lots of it. If you've got candida, start eating fermented foods. Start eating lots of raw cream and butter if you can get it, because it heals up the gut like nobody's business, and so does this coconut oil. And the reason why it does that is because it's rich in what they call the medium chain triglycerides. One of them being lauric acid, the other one's being called caprylic acid and caproic acid. They're all anti-inflammatory. And the second, I should say that and again, if you go to the Weston A. Price Foundation, you'll find books on this. Speaking of that, fermentation, they have a great book by Sandor Katz, who was in Australia when I was in for the Woodford Folk Festival last December. He's got a great book on how to easily and inexpensively, quickly, and deliciously make all kinds of fermented foods, and it's called Wild Fermentation by Sandor, K-A-T-Z, and you can get it from the Weston Price Foundation bookstore, online or through the local chapters. And they also have a book on the healing properties of coconut oil. This stuff here, lauric acid, these medium chain triglycerides, caproic and caprylic acid, they're found in abundance in human breast milk. And why do you think that is? Well, they're very anti-pathogenic. Lauric acid, 3M Company, you know, the people who make the Scotch tape, they also make a cow teat dip out of lauric acid because it's very anti-infective. So you want to rub it on your skin. I know people that have used this on skin cancer, and they could actually see the skin cancer respond just by rubbing it and eating coconut oil. It's profound. 92% saturated, which is why it got demonized. Very resistant to rancidity. Get the book and read it. It's got a lot of evidence of it. Yes?
We always talk about eating a lot of fat, butter and cream and coconut oil. It's terrifying to get fat. How do you not get fat?
She wants to know, how don't you get fat? Because it's the insulin driving the sugar out of the blood that's primarily pocketing it away from you. The fats, I mean, first of all, if you eat these fats, you're not going to be hungry. You're not going to force feed these things. You're not going to stick your head in a bowl of lard and suck it up with a straw. You're going to cook with this stuff. And you'll find out when you eat fat, your cravings go away. You want to get rid of your sugar cravings? Start eating fat. That's how you get rid of your sugar cravings. But you got to eat good fat. You can't eat potato chips. And read the labels. See what kind of fat's in it. You'd be surprised if it says natural. Don't believe it. Natural doesn't mean squat. Read the labels. You'll find out that in a lot of foods that say contains a multi-grain this or a natural only ingredient. Read the label, you'll see what's in it. It's far from, yes?
I just comment, Jerry, I went to the health food shop in Naracoorte after your talk last week and bought some coconut oils. The lady there said she really enjoyed the talk, the lady in the health food shop, but she said she's very concerned about the amount of fat you're recommending. And I think that's probably a general comment, but people in the health food industry are about hung up there about fats. But when you come along and advocate fat here, fat here, fat everywhere, it scares them.
I am Mr. Fat. I eat fat like, you know, I'll tell you what, and this is interesting. They all worried about, they look at fat, and what do they see? They see coconut oil in a jar, or they see lard in a jar, and what's it look like? Axle grease. And they say, if I eat that, it's going to plug up my plumbing like axle grease. That's what they think. You know what they've done? They've analyzed the plaque in people who have had cardiovascular illnesses. And guess what they found out? That 75% of the plaque is polyunsaturated vegetable fats. 25% is saturated. So it's not coming from the saturated fat. And if you're eating saturated fat from sources that are grown and raised right, it's a totally different fat than feedlot fat. Pigs from concentration camps, eggs from concentration camps, feedlot dairies from concentration camps, all the fat that's going in there is all coming from where? Grain. And it creates a different kind of a fat. And omega-6 fats to excess are inflammatory. Inflammation is the key. Omega-3 fats are anti-inflammatory. First of all, here's what just to give you a heads up, I consume a smoothie when I'm home just about every day. And it contains 12 ounces of raw milk, 4 ounces of raw cream, 2 raw eggs, 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, a tablespoon of flaxseed or linseed oil, and then I've got spices in there, a cup of blueberries, and I've got spices consisting of about a teaspoon of cinnamon, a half a teaspoon or up to a teaspoon of nutmeg, and about a third of a teaspoon thereabouts of allspice, and a pinch of cardamom, about a third of a teaspoon of cardamom. These are primarily for flavor, but the spices are also antimicrobial. I'm trying to keep my digestive system free of guys that I don't want in there. Now, sometimes what I do, instead of putting in all milk, I'll take in about 4 ounces of raw yogurt that I make, or have someone make for me. So then instead of having 12 ounces of raw milk, I might use 8 ounces of raw milk, whole fat milk. This insanity of low fat. I was over, where was it? Paris Creek, which is a biodynamic dairy farm that makes their yogurt. How many people know that farm? Okay, some of you know who that is. And on the way from Adelaide to Perth, when we were on this tour, I stopped in at their farm and we had an interesting discussion. They took me to the airport, so we had dialogue. And you know, it was very interesting for them to tell me that all the people who come up, because they do wholesaling of yogurt in the grocery stores, and so they're there basically introducing the product to the customers. Everybody who comes up and says, oh, do you have any no-fat yogurt? They're this big. The people who don't care about the fat in the yogurt are thin as rails. They don't care about the fat. It's not bothering them. Now you might say, oh, that's metabolism. No. It's about digestion, and it's about the fact that people are loaded with starch and loaded with sugar and loaded with insulin, and then they run around saying, oh, I'm trying to keep my weight down so they don't eat any fat. And yet they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you go to get the blood test and you find out that they got high triglycerides, which are going to kill them. They've got high sugar, which is going to kill them. They got high C-reactive proteins. They've got high homocysteine levels, and they're worried about what? Cholesterol. And the cholesterol in some of these people that are on these low cholesterol diets because they're on drugs is going up, 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 up. Cholesterol to me is kind of like blaming firemen for fires. Every time you see a fire, who happens to be there? Firemen. Therefore, there's an association between firemen and fires, if you connect the dots. And that's what's happening with cholesterol. It's showing up because you have a lot of oxidation and you have a lot of inflammation. And so the cholesterol is a universal antioxidant, and it's patching up all this oxidation of the lining of the blood vessels. And because you've got these major deficiencies of certain things and major excesses of other things, it's causing this runaway inflammation. And the cholesterol is responding to the inflammation. Now, in some cases, once it gets up so high, you know, if you want to lower it, fine. But recognize that it didn't get there because of a deficiency of statin drugs. It got there because of an excess of certain things and a deficiency of other things, all having to do with what the hell you eat and don't eat. That's why you got high cholesterol. It's not because, you know, Merck didn't come out with this in time. I had grandparents live in their 90s, and they never worried about fat. And my grandfather smoked. And he ate all these foods that are villainized now. Eggs and meats and prosciutto. I mean, you know, pork fat. I mean, they ate lots of vegetables and fruits with all of it, but it wasn't these vegan diets. The unhealthiest people I meet, unfortunately enough, are vegetarians. And the reason why? They eat a lot of carbs. They eat organic cookies. They eat organic brownies. They eat a lot of carbohydrates. That's the problem. You got to balance the carbs. And I don't believe the Atkins diet is necessarily the way to go, because it's not balancing the carbs with the proteins. And the best way to get the carbs is in the vegetables and the squashes and the chestnuts and the potatoes and things like that. And stay away from the damn bread and stay from the sugar. But I'll guarantee you right now, you're having a hell of a hard time to do it. Yes?
Jerry, how would you explain that supposedly, and I don't know where the statistics come from, but supposedly heart disease has come down? And that's one question. The other question, you were talking about native populations. When you read the history, it would suggest that their life expectancy was 45 or 50. Seems to contradict what you're saying.
Okay, those are good comments, and they're worth addressing. Number one, heart disease, deaths from heart attacks is coming down because of emergency services have been improved. So people are being rescued more effectively. Thus, the wonders of modern medical medicine. I agree. The statistics on heart attacks are improving because of the fact that, but congestive heart failure is not going down. That's going up, congestive heart failure. The other cardiac arrests are decreasing, and that's right. And some of that has to do with medical emergency breakthroughs that keep you alive now. Before, if you got a heart attack and they arrived at your house, you know, you didn't make it. Now they can sustain your life and get you to the hospital. But congestive heart failure is not going down. As far as the indigenous people, yeah, there were people that didn't live to be as old as others. However, and this is a big issue, the people who lived on the indigenous diets, and it's in the Weston Price Manual, you'll see the documentation there. There's also this myth that our ancestors, before the 20th century, all died at around the age of 50. Now, where I live in Pennsylvania, not too far from me, there is a 20-acre cemetery that goes back to the French and Indian War, the very first conflicts that were fought on the American continent before the Revolutionary War. I'm talking 18th century. That cemetery is that old, 20 acres. And you can go around and look at the family plots. And they go all the way back to that time. And what do you see? You see family plots, and you see people who live to be in their 70s and 80s, even into their 90s. But you'll also see a lot of children in those family plots that died from these outbreaks of childhood diseases at the age of 8 or 14 or 12. When you take an average lifespan, factor in the children who died, let's say, at the age of 12, and somebody who lived to be 70, which is fairly young by today's standards, but say, you know, so that's what? An age of 82, correct? All right, divide 82 by 2, what do you come up with? 41. That's where they come up with the average life expectancy averages of death. People who died when they were young, people who died when they were old. But if you got past those childhood illnesses, many of which were, you know, found out to be associated with, you know, cleanliness and hygiene and some of those things, as well as infectious agents that since have been eradicated for the most part, you went and lived to be as long as everybody else lives along today. In fact, right now they're talking about this generation coming up behind me are not going to live as long as my generation. It's going backwards now. Well, no kidding. If you've got 1 out of 3 kids going to end up being diabetic, I got news for you. There's no way you can bring the lifespan beyond what it is right now, because you do shorten lifespan profoundly with diabetes. Profoundly. And cancer rates are going up. Cancer now is bypassing the heart illnesses. But those are very good points, and I appreciate your comments on them, because there is a lot of that being used as the reason why we are the healthiest nation, or we're the healthiest civilization, or the healthiest age of people. We're not. When it comes to trauma, absolutely. When it comes to infectious illnesses, we were doing good on that, but I think we're going to start slipping on that because we don't have antibiotics that work like they used to, and our immune systems are falling apart. And that's proven. Flaxseed oil. A lot of people look at flaxseed oil and they say, well, that's the oil I want to take for the omega-3s. Well, it is the only cereal high in omega-3, but you need magnesium, you need zinc, you need B6, you need vitamin C to convert it to what? The EPA-DHA. And that's the part you got to think about, because those are all enzyme related, and a lot of people can't do it on enzymes. Oops. Starches, I just talked about that. Eat the starches that come from foods like the chestnuts or the potatoes. And breads. This is the only bread I tend to eat at home. The one on the left is a 7-sprouted grain bread. It's not even, there's no flour in that bread. It's made 100% from sprouts. I don't know how the hell they make it, because it's very fluffy and it's very easy to cut, and there's no flour in the bread. This one on the right is another bread that I would endorse, and that's called sourdough bread, which is another word of what? Fermenting. You ferment the grain. Why is it important not to eat grain even if it's whole grain? What's the problem with grain? Go to Mercola.com, M-E-R-C-O-L-A, Dr. Mercola in Chicago, Mercola.com, and you'll read his newsletter. It's free. 5 minutes? Okay. And you'll recognize that grains are not to be eaten by any animals really, except animals that are birds. We don't have the digestive system to eat grain unless you sprout it or you ferment it. Why? What's in grain that's so hard on people? Phytic acid or phytates, which will do what? Inhibit mineral absorption. We already have a deficiency of minerals anyway in the diet. Number 2, they contain enzyme inhibitors. Remember we were talking about enzymes? Well, if you want to inhibit the enzymes in the foods you eat a lot of grain, even if it's whole grain. So that's what I eat for bread when I'm home. I eat either sourdough breads that I can get somebody makes that are remarkable and breaks all these nasty things down in grain, pre-digests them, or it sprouts them out of existence. Milk is medicine. Milk is something else you shouldn't drink, and here's another half-baked story, and I would say that based on what's available in the U.S., in the stores, in the grocery stores, I don't drink it either. And there's a variety of reasons for that. The main reason why is because when you pasteurize, and even worse, pasteurize plus homogenize milk, you change a lot of things about milk so that it's not milk anymore. Sorry to say it, guys, but that's what's happening. One of the things that's in milk that is remarkable is this antibiotic-like compound called lactoferrin, which again, research has shown that it's an effective antibiotic against Helicobacter pylori, Salmonella, E. coli. It increases natural killer cells, which is the immune system. It increases the cytotoxicity of your white cells. There's that wonderful word again, inhibits angiogenesis. And this part here, scavenges free iron necessary for the growth of cancer cells and microbes. A lot of infectious circumstances like malaria and hemochromatosis and cancer and Lyme disease, E. coli infections deal with the presence of this thing called free iron, which is basically an iron that's not bound to body tissue or cells. and it stimulates the growth of these organisms. And this is basically a free iron scavenger. The other compound that's also good for this, which I don't have in the slide show, is a substance called artemisinin. And artemisinin is a derivative of artemisia, which is another word for wormwood. And they've used it for years for malaria because it scavenges the free iron out of the blood so that the malaria can't reproduce. They found out at Washington State University that you can use artemisinin. You can get this, you can check this out at allergyresearch.com or Nutricology, Nutricology.com. They both carry this compound, and it's from the Sweet Annie Artemisia plant. And some very profound research, small amounts of artemisinin, which is both water and fat soluble extracts of this plant, have a profound impact on neoplastic cells in that when it comes in contact with the free iron, there's a peroxide reaction. Oxygen is released and it destroys these cells, these abnormal cells. And they've got some profound results at Washington State University Medical School from this. But you don't hear much about that either. Hyperimmune milk, the Merck patent. What that is on the right-hand side is my own homemade colostrum yogurt. And the stuff on the left is just regular yogurt from an organic dairy farm in Pennsylvania that I know the owners of and patronize them occasionally with that product. And the reason why I brought this up, and this is a compelling story. Before 1946, Merck was the largest serum manufacturer in the world. And they primarily manufactured horse serums, horse-based serums. And then they actually went into the application of making a milk serum. And the application for this milk serum contained all potential human illnesses from polio to tuberculosis to anthrax to diphtheria to malaria, on and on and on. It's all listed in the patent application. And something very interesting happened in 1946 that caused the patent to be pretty much put on the shelf to collect dust. It never was reconciled at the patent office, and it was called Fleming's penicillin, which was released in 46, and that changed the entire big pharma industry, where now pharmaceutical companies realized it was a lot more profitable to synthesize drugs than it would be to make serums, because you have to have time and you have to have live animals and a lot more labor intensive and so forth. So a fellow by the name of Dr. William Peterson picked up this technology. He was at the University of Minnesota, and he was a dairy scientist there. And he was interested in this research because he had an interest in the fact that this hyperimmune milk, which is what they call it, where they take a human antigen, hyperimmunize the dry, pregnant cow with this vaccine, if you will, and then harvest the colostrum and make this milk serum out of it. Well, his interest was arthritis. And so he ran with this technology and acquired the patent for it. And then he eventually teamed up with another fellow by the name of Ralph Stoley. And Ralph Stoley was an inventor and an entrepreneur from near Cincinnati, Ohio, who was involved in patenting vaccine adjuvants, which are the carriers for vaccines, and he also invented the flip-top cap. So if you have anything against Ralph Stoley, that might be it, if you ever stepped on one of those damn things. So Ralph Stoley, in fact, he lived just to be a few years ago. He lived to be in his mid-90s. And he made a product that they just called Stoley milk. And what they did there is they would take human antigens, vaccinate lactating cows instead of dry cows, dry pregnant cows. He vaccinated lactating cows with various human antigens, harvested the milk, dried it down, and he gave that milk powder out to anybody in the state of Ohio who had any kind of condition whatsoever, and they could have it for free. All he asked that they do was fill out a progress report to let him know whether or not it was helping them, because he wanted to get some sort of feedback as to whether or not this was working and what specifically it was working on. They eventually formed an Immune Milk Association, and they got together with a guy named Dr. Herb Struss, and they actually published the Immune Milk Journal, and they actually had an organization that was supported by many medical practitioners throughout the United States that were really interested in immune milk medicine. And eventually what happened was the FDA, along with the AMA, crushed them. They put the journal out of business. They basically put the association out of business. And then what happened was Peterson ultimately sold the patent to an Irish family in Iowa by the name of Collins, who formed a company called Impro, and they started making the serums just for livestock use, which I had experienced the use of those products starting way back in the mid-70s. So I knew there was this technology, I just didn't know the actual connect-the-dots history to this. In the meantime, Stoli was trying to go out and see if he couldn't find some grass-based dairies, because he knew he wanted it from grass-based dairies that he could use his patent on and produce this hyperimmune milk so that he had a market in the United States for inflammation, anti-inflammatory kinds of treatments for particularly arthritis. One of the things that I noticed with the Impro product, it had profound results on people's immune systems. People with arthritis responded very well to it. People with high blood pressure responded well to it. It was fascinating work. Stoli, in the meantime, was looking at primarily inflammation also. In fact, today you can buy Stoli's product in a capsule in the United States called microlactin for arthritis, for inflammation for arthritis. And Stoli actually makes the product in New Zealand because he couldn't get it done in the United States. So he went to New Zealand, used New Zealand cows, processed the product, and he sells, from what I understand, about $10 million of dried Stoli milk powder in Taiwan and Japan every year. And now the microlactin seems to be coming back into the States, and it's reasonably priced compared to some of the other arthritic formulas, natural formulas that are on the market. Well, the relevance of all this is I looked at the information that was in the patent, and I decided, since I had this lymphoma, I was looking for something to augment immunity. One of the things that I recognized looking at the work from Dr. Burkitt, who was a Nigerian physician that found out that 100% of the biopsied lymph nodes of lymphoma patients in Nigeria all had tested positive for the herpes virus family, every one of them. So I thought, okay, that's one of the things I'm going to check out. So I did, and I found out that I had exposure, which means I had antibody presences either historically or currently for either human herpes virus number 6, number 7, number 8, cytomegalovirus, and Epstein-Barr virus, even though I never had a symptom for viruses like fever sores or shingles or blisters or anything like that. I also found out recently, this is really compelling, and this was published in The Lancet, March 2002, and that they found out that there seems to be a smoking gun connection between simian virus 40 and lymphoma. And the reason the connection is there is because they're finding people in my generation are showing about 55,000 new cases of lymphoma every single year. The connection seems to be associated with contaminated polio vaccines. About 45 to 50% of maybe those 50 or 55,000 new cases of lymphoma annually in the US may now be proven to be connected to simian virus contaminated vaccines for polio, which of course my generation got in the late 50s, mid 50s, and up to about 1963. That's when the contamination apparently went. And so I realized that these viral loads, and interestingly enough, the US government stopped the funding on the research as soon as they found out that the vials that were still in the freezer showed that's the polio vaccines were contaminated with this virus, and that 0% of the controls, in other words, people who didn't have lymphoma, not one of them showed any contamination or presence of simian virus 40. But 45 to 50% of the lymphoma patients showed simian virus 40. A little too coincidental? I don't think so. So this was published in the literature in March of 2002. So what I decided to do was I figured, well, whatever antigens I'm struggling with, whatever infectious agents I'm struggling with, they're in my blood. So what I did, weirdly enough, is I made my own autogenous substance by drawing out 10 cc's of blood weekly. Basically what I did is I leased a cow from one of my Amish clients, And I took my blood down there every week and hyperimmunized that dry, pregnant cow up the teat, taking the needle off of the syringe after I withdrew the blood from a heparin tube. Heparin's a blood thinner. Draw it out into the syringe, put the cannula, the soft tip on the end, infuse it up the teat canal. And I did that every week for 8 weeks while that animal was still dry and gestating. And then when she calved, we harvested the milk, put it in 1 liter freezer bags and froze it. And then what I proceeded to do was make hyperimmune colostrum smoothies. And I started drinking these smoothies, and lo and behold, I got what I expected, which is what's called a Herxheimer's reaction. And Herxheimer's reaction means that, for example, you have a yeast infection and you start taking something that's effective against the yeast infection, you get a quick die-off, for example, and the die-off gives you this flu-like reaction called a Herxheimer's reaction. Within about 4 days, I got this intense Herxheimer's reaction, so I knew something was happening. I also found out that my natural killer cell functions was very low, and they based this on not just the counts. They measure natural killer cell levels. I also found out they measure the performance of natural killer cells through a test called the measurement of lytic, L-Y-T-I-C units. And what they do is they basically take the blood, they extract the natural killer cells out of them, and they challenge the natural killer cells with antigens to see if they actually know what the hell they're doing, or if they're just sitting around playing cards. And they have it based on a lytic units scale of roughly 0 to 225, and mine registered about 75. The average American, according to the lab that I used, the samples coming in from the average Americans were somewhere between 25 and 50. That's how suppressed immunity is in the United States. So the only promise I made to the Amish farmer about the cow was that I promised him that his cows definitely would not change their appetite for forages for Italian cannolis, and it didn't. And it wouldn't have any pizza cravings or anything like that. The cow was fine. But we collected this milk, and that's what we did. Now the interesting thing about this is after a while, now we're talking, I don't know, 3 years, I guess, later, 3 years since this milk was collected. I had a surplus of it. I didn't drink it all. As things go in circles, a gentleman that lives a few miles from me that I really didn't know very well, but I knew his wife because she actually was an instructor, equine instructor for my granddaughter. I found out that he had, a couple of years ago, contracted melanoma. And curiously enough, he ended up going to the same oncologist that I went to, that I first talked about. And anyway, he had had the melanoma extracted. They got it all, you know, that famous quote, they got it all. And he had gone through for periodic checkups, I think it was every 2 or 3 months for the last 2 years. And then this past August, he found out that it was now in his lungs, stage 4, and in his spine, metastasized. 2-month lifespan. That's it. They didn't know what else to do because they don't treat melanoma with chemotherapy. The only thing that they start looking at using is interleukin, which allegedly works about 5% of the cases. The other 95% it doesn't work at all. So it was a death sentence. And this woman had ended up giving me a call because she, unbeknownst to her, didn't know that I had dealt with this illness, not melanoma, but lymphoma, and was advised by people in the health food store who I know quite well to contact me. And needless to say, she was in a lather, a panic. And I really didn't know what else to offer her because I don't know anything about melanoma any more than I knew anything about lymphoma when I first came in contact with this illness through my own experience. And I never really knew anybody that died of melanoma or was even ill with melanoma, other than very, very minute cases, you know, very early cases. But that's one of the things that was intriguing about this case is that it was, you know, considered a home run in terms of that localized condition being removed. Everything was fine for 3 months at a time until 2 years passes on, and then you get, you know, a metastasis of stage 4. So I told her about this hyperimmune milk, and I said, you know, he was now in the hospital. This was now in the fall, I guess. We're talking October into November, I believe we're talking now. And now he's in intensive care. He's going through severe cachexia, wasting disease, given maybe a week or 2 weeks to live in intensive care. So what we did, or what she did, was took my recipe, took the colostrum, made up these smoothies, brought him to the hospital, the oncology ward, and her husband started drinking this stuff. And within a week, he's sitting up, drinking almost a liter a day of this hyperimmune milk. My milk, not his, my own. And next thing you know, his skin is clearing up, his weight losses are stopping, and he's starting to put weight back on. Remember I said about half the people who die of cancer die of cachexia. Most people who die of cancer die of severe malnutrition at that point. He ended up going home. And even though he was struggling, with, not being fully recovered, he was able to eat most of the time. He was not in a lot of pain until quite recently. Actually, right before I came overseas here is when she was struggling with him having some pain. And we're not sure whether the pain is actually coming from the metastasis or whether it's coming from basically damage that the metastasis had caused and may not even be an issue right now. We don't know. We don't know. But I do know it's March and this man's alive. And I do know that it wasn't just the colostrum when he got home. There was a battery of supplements. The artemisinin was one. He also went on this indole 3-carbinol. And the indole 3-carbinol is a very interesting substance, and I don't know whether this is on this slideshow or not, but it's a substance that's an extract from the cruciferous family. And indole 3-carbinol is a very, very powerful anticarcinogenic compound. And it's been heavily researched, including one component of indole 3-carbinol called DIM, standing for diindole methane, which Louisiana State University had used an extract of for terminally afflicted uterine cancer patients. And with something like 400 or 500 milligrams of that extract a day, they arrested 50% of the terminal patients, which is profound. Now think about that. Think about whether or not a substance like this that has this kind of an effect, 50%, what drug does that? Show me a drug that even comes close to that. So this hyperimmune milk, there's definitely something to it, and I know that's why Ralph Stoley proceeded and persisted in trying to get this product off the ground, and why it's probably as successful as it is, because from what I understand, he's selling about $10 million of this annually in Japan and Taiwan every year now. There's got to be something that's going on in terms of rectifying or reconciling degenerative illnesses. And I know what it did for me. I've seen what colostrum can do for other people. One of the veterinarians that attended the Perth workshop came up to me on break after I talked about this, and he was saying that he had read research papers, medical research papers, about how just straight up raw colostrum affected certain kinds of viral and bacterial illnesses in dogs and puppies in particular. And so he was using it on this very tenacious mouth virus, this coccivirus that cats get, that's very, very difficult to reconcile because the animals can't eat, so they waste away because there's a lot of sores in the mouth. And the antibiotic treatments, and it's very labor intensive and medically frustrating. And what he found out was just collecting colostrum, freezing it, and then putting it in syringes and administering raw colostrum in the mouth did an amazing amount of work in rectifying these quote-unquote incurable cat illnesses, many of which die because they just waste away also. There's an interesting website if you want to look at this whole raw milk initiative, and again, you can go to realmilk.com or .org and rawmilk.com or .org. I forget the org or the com, but you can Google and find it readily enough. It's also affiliated with the Weston A. Price Foundation. I'm on the raw milk committee in my state, and we know that there's a huge difference between raw milk from grass-fed animals and pasteurized milk, particularly if it's from feedlot types of animals. Major difference. A lot of the people who have milk allergies don't have milk allergies, they have basically adulterated milk allergies, and I'm one of them. I don't do well on milk that's been pasteurized and homogenized, but I can drink remarkable amounts of raw milk, and I do. Like I said, I drink a total of about 1 liter drink a day, of which, you know, at least half of it is raw milk and cream. And I don't gain weight. I feel wonderful in terms of appetite. It satiates to the point where you're not even hungry until middle afternoon. And the only bad thing about it, really the downside, is if you're Italian descent, you like to eat food and you have no appetite because you're completely satiated. So you got to pretend you're hungry sometimes and cook things in the skillet. And butter gets villainized. And yet, you know, look at the things that they've discovered about butter. The Woolsen anti-stiffness factor, that's in butter. That was discovered by a German physician by the name of Dr. Woolsen. Protects against degenerative arthritis, hardening of the arteries, and cataracts. The short and medium chain fatty acids, that's in what? The coconut oil shows up in butter. About 15% of the total butter fat. And it's so easy to absorb. It's absorbed directly by the small intestine without any requirements by bile. Then it's got this incredible substance, the fat in all the grass-fed products, whether it's meat or whether it's milk, as long as it's ruminants, is the conjugated linoleic acid. And the conjugated linoleic acid is potentially maybe the most potent animal source cancer-fighting substance we know, the CLA. The glycosphingolipids. These are the things that protect against gastrointestinal infections. Ever since we've gotten on these vegetable fats, we've lost the protective raw materials for the GI tract that are in these healing fats. And then it's loaded with trace elements. Butter is a very, very good accumulator of healthy trace elements if they're in the soil to begin with, namely chromium and iodine, manganese, selenium, and zinc. And this is the cholesterol marquee. It's necessary to synthesize vitamin D if you're out in the sun, which we need for mineral absorption, insulin production, healthy nerves, synthesis of bile salts. So if you're eating fat, you need cholesterol. Production of all the hormones, including the anti-stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, and the sex hormones like testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. The cell membrane elasticity and strength, antioxidant, necessary for brain and nerve development, and serotonin. The availability to the brain is necessary for cholesterol. Serotonin is the feel-good mineral, which now we have epidemic amounts of depression, which are dealt with, what? More drugs. And that has a lot to do with deficiencies and these anti-nutrient toxins. And the deficiencies I emphasize aren't just the trace elements, but the essential fats. So the fat of the land, if it's the right kind of fat, is the fat of the sea. Now you see, these are organic. It's no coincidence that organic milk, even though it's processed, is growing by 20 to 25% per year in the United States. What else doubles in 4 to 5 years in growth? You show me a business that has that kind of growth. What's that all about? And I think it has something to do with the fact that the Monsanto fiasco called bovine growth hormone isn't being well received in the United States like they thought it would be, in spite of all the propaganda, in spite of all the cover-up, in spite of all the lies about that stuff. People are concerned. And so raw milk, I should say, organic milk is on the upswing, and so is raw milk. There's an interesting website you might want to go to, because there's this myth, and there's a book back here that again it comes through the Weston A. Price Foundation, written by Dr. Ron Schmid, who's a naturopath and a small-time dairy farmer out of Connecticut. And it's called The Untold Story of Milk. Most people don't know the truth about milk. A lot of people are very, very afraid to consume raw milk because they think they're going to get undulant fever or tuberculosis or worse. And yet, milk from healthy animals on grass, and the proof of the pudding on this one is organicpastures.com, which is a 300-cow dairy near Fresno, California, that publishes all their bacteria counts and quality counts of their farm. They milk those cows with a mobile milking parlor, and they sell raw milk to approximately 40 states, 13 foreign countries, mostly California, because you can actually sell raw milk in California like you can in Pennsylvania under state license, certified raw milk. But what a lot of people don't realize is that this milk actually was sent to the University of California at Davis, and the Swedish veterinarian researcher there that challenged the milk with extremely high doses of Campylobacter, Listeria, E. coli 0157, and Salmonella. And they couldn't get it to grow. By the 6th day, all the organisms were vacant. Now try that with pasteurized milk and find out what happens. Why? Lactoperoxidase, lactoferrin, enzymes, lactobacillus organisms, niacin, acetylene, all those things we were talking about, that's what's in milk. These compounds that are in milk that are growth inhibitors that allow the milk to be, in effect, an anti-pathogen. So when you're drinking raw milk, you actually are encouraging the growth of the good bugs, if you want to call them that, and discouraging the opportunistic pathogenic organisms. That's exactly what happens. If you want to take it to another step, go to Sandor Katz's book, Wild Fermentation, or Donna Gates's book, which is called The Body Ecology Diet. And it's all about making things like kefir, which is this yogurt-like drink that's very big in the Eastern European states, in Russia, in the Middle East, and what a health drink this material is, and how it can completely change your ecosystem, your inner ecosystem, so you don't have these plagues. And so what we look at is fresh and fermented grass-based dairy, fat-soluble A, vitamin D, lactic acid, all 22 amino acids, including the 8 essential ones, the 500 saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, yay, fatty acids, minerals that are 100% metabolically available, including the macros and 24 trace elements, 35 identified enzymes, including phosphatase. And phosphatase is an enzyme that helps you absorb calcium and phosphorus, and it happens to be the marker enzyme that the dairies test to see if they've cooked the milk long enough, because when they've destroyed phosphatase, they know the milk is ready to bottle. That's the marker enzyme, phosphatase. And then CLA, this wonderful substance that works on not just, by the way, CLA is an excellent weight loss supplement. And where do you find it? In fat. You can buy the supplements, pay a lot of money, but you can get it in fat. So CLA is used by bodybuilders and people that want to lose weight. That's where you get it, out of the fat. Yes?
Jerry, what about soy products?
Ooh.
There's a lot of naturopaths putting kids on
Soy, yeah. Well, there's this, here we go again. Yeah, and it's understandable that the naturopaths take kids off of conventional dairy, because conventional dairy does have a lot of problems. I agree with them. A lot of kids have milk allergies, but not to milk, to the fact that it's been adulterated with homogenization and pasteurization. Putting them on soy might be going from the frying pan into the fire, even though you don't have all of the mucus and the kinds of problems that milk creates when it's processed. The problem with soy, it's not a natural food. Who invented soy milk? The Orient didn't invent soy milk. What's that? Somebody had some comment?
What you said, the farmers, soy farmers.
Well, soy milk is a relatively Western invention. In fact, that's why they got to put all kinds of sweeteners in it, because it tastes like garbage. Soybeans are quite unhealthy to eat as soybeans. The Orient has been growing soybeans as a cover crop for a long time before they finally figured out how to eat them safely. And how do they eat them? They ferment them. They make 3 great products out of fermented soybeans. One's called miso. The other one's called natto. And now you can buy a supplement called nattokinase. And nattokinase breaks down blood clots, fibrin, dissolves it, instead of coumarin, which is what? Rat poison, warfarin. Nattokinase. It's an enzyme from natto. And then tempeh. This gentleman that was on my milk, one of the things that he also did is a great remedy if you want to get well, is he added miso soup to bone broth soup. Bone broth soups are very healing for anybody who's really struggling because they're very bioavailable. Bone broth soups with miso added to it, any vegetables that you like, and the hyperimmune milk, and then get on some of the supplements. I'm only going to take a little bit more time and go to a couple of mineral things, and then we're going to call it because it's getting late and I don't want to keep you people up. But there's a couple of minerals that I think you really ought to pay attention to. And one of them is selenium. I take fairly high levels of selenium and I pulse it. Depends on tests. I haven't had any tests done lately. But I'm convinced that that stuff is a miraculous trace element because it's so associated with, and this is, again, the medical literature shows that this actually happens. It stops viral replication. There seems to be an understanding now why in Africa, which is ravaged by HIV, up to 38–40% incidence of AIDS in some of these countries. I mean, just an unbelievable pandemic of this virus, if you want to go there. And yet there's a country that doesn't seem to be nearly as affected, and it's a country called Senegal. And Senegal happens to be a piece of land on this Cretaceous inland ancient seabed that's an apatite soil, calcium and phosphate soil that's loaded with selenium. The incidence of HIV in Senegal is 1.77%, which I think is lower than New York City's incidence of HIV. And yet all around them, they've got these ravenous, and they know now that selenium actually works like an antiviral replicating drug. That's just one thing that it does. It's part of so many immune pathways, including glutathione peroxidase, which is the tripeptide of glycine, glutamic acid, and methionine hooking up with selenium. The other mineral that I use that I think is really important and people are acutely deficient in, and it's also a cleansing. One thing I like about selenium, it's a cleansing mineral for the anti-nutrient or the toxic compounds. It's antagonistic against things like mercury. And I had fairly elevated levels of mercury. I had fairly elevated levels of arsenic, which I think came from handling pressure-treated lumber without gloves. If you're dealing with pressure-treated lumber, particularly the stuff that's the chromium, copper, arsenic variety, I would wear protection because that stuff comes off very readily, even though the manufacturers, when they first came out with it, said no problem. And now they've eliminated it in the United States because all the playgrounds where they've built playground equipment out of pressure-treated lumber, the arsenic levels in the soil are 100 to 1,000 times higher than the EPA limits are supposed to be. It just bleaches right out of the wood, and you have children playing in this soil with arsenic all over their hands and putting their hands in their mouth like little kids do. And so now they had to stop the manufacture of arsenic-treated lumber, you know? So it just goes to show you what you can pick up in some pretty strange ways in some strange places. But selenium, I think, is really a good antagonistic mineral against these toxic metals. Mercury, lead, I think, especially mercury. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone over in Perth who does orthomolecular medicine over there, and he was saying, interestingly enough, that the marine animals that are high on the food chain don't seem to come down with mercury toxicity like we do on the top of the food chain, because in the ocean water, as their mercury levels start to increase in their body tissues, so does the intake of selenium. It's almost sort of like the body knows to suck up more selenium as it's sucking up more mercury. That's not true with the land animals, though, which I think we are. The other mineral is iodine. And I read this research based on work that was done by a Canadian MD by the name of Dr. Derry, D-E-R-R-Y. And I think the name of the book is called Iodine and Breast Cancer. And there's another MD out of Michigan by the name of Brownstein, who also wrote a book about iodine and cancer. And what they found out was that the Japanese in the industrialized world have the lowest incidence of prostate cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, And within a generation or two of them moving to the United States, they have the same incidence of those same cancers as regular Americans do. And what these two books point out with the data is that the Japanese consume between 100 and 500 times more iodine. Not 100% or 500%, 100 times to 500 times more iodine than we do, because they eat a lot of sea vegetables, and when they eat the sea food, like the fish, all of the fish is eaten. The head is eaten, the eyes are eaten, we only eat the fillets. Now, weirdly enough, Iceland, which is an island in the North Atlantic, is a fishing and farming community. It relies on what? Dairy and seafood as its mainstays. Years ago, they used to take the fish waste, because they eat the fillets. They don't eat the whole fish like the Orientals do. They eat them like the Europeans do, the fillets. And so the fish waste went back into the agricultural system, some of which was fed as protein supplement to dairy cows, fish waste. And they found out when the fish were fed to the dairy cows, that the iodine that's in the fish actually accumulated, because the glands that accumulate iodine, the most concentrated gland is the thyroid gland, which is the body's thermostat. But the other glands that are very thirsty for iodine are the ovaries, the prostate, and in terms of quantity, amounts, not necessarily concentration, the breasts, lacteal glands. Well, what's a dairy cow? The four-legged animal with a big giant breast, right? So all that iodine is going to where? The milk. And so these people were consuming high amounts of iodine in the milk. And in the United States, the recommended daily allowance of iodine is about 175 micrograms. If you look at what the Japanese consume, they consume up to 50,000 micrograms a day, just in their diet. Nothing comes close. And there's no doubt about it, because now we know that in the family, the chemical family called halogens, elements like fluorine, which they put in the water, chlorine, which they put in the water, and bromine, which they put now as a dough conditioner in the flour, where they used to put iodine. They used to put iodine as a dough conditioner in flour. So all these people that eat pastry and breads were getting another maybe a couple of hundred grams, 175 micrograms, excuse me, of iodine daily. That's disappeared, and they've replaced it with bromine, which is not something you want to eat high amounts of, especially at the expense of iodine. Because bromine is used to make cancer-causing fire retardants, and now the breast milk of American women has about 40 times the bromine-based fire retardants in them than the European women have. Because they put it in carpeting, they put it on upholstery, they put it on the drapes, it's everywhere for fire retardants. And so we've taken the iodine out of the bread or the flour, stuck the bromine in there instead, and now we're loaded with bromine, we're loaded with fluoride. Fluoride helps deliver more mercury to the brain, which is what the Alzheimer's connection probably is more concerned about. In addition to the aluminum factor, fluoride also helps deliver more effectively the aluminum to the brain. So iodine, they actually found out that it can actually sequester heavy metals out of the body, particularly some of the halogen metals like fluoride and bromine. And the way of monitoring that is through the urine. You can actually, as you start taking iodine levels at high enough doses, you can see that the iodine levels start to increase, and after a period of time, the excretion of the bromine also and the fluoride goes up. You're flushing these halogens out of your system. These are not things you want in there. They're immunosuppressive, and they're antagonistic to other minerals being able to work. So I'm a big believer of iodine, because not only does it do that, in the bloodstream, iodine is a remarkable antiseptic. It kills viruses, it kills yeast, it kills bacteria. In the United States, you can use this wonderful iodine compound, I mentioned it today, called EDDI. It's an organic iodine molecule that the FDA used to regulate at about 10 milligrams per cow per day. And now you can feed 50 milligrams. And what both of these physicians in these research books talk about is that the glandular system of the body has preferences. Some glands can take iodine as a form of iodide or iodine, and some glands prefer iodide and other glands prefer iodine. So you need a variety. You need at least a variety of them. And of course, the best way to get that is in food. But if you don't take it in food, one of the best places to get it, very inexpensively, is a remedy that's been around for about 100 years in the veterinarian and medical profession called Lugol's iodine solution, L-U-G-O-L-S. And that's iodine and iodide. And all you need to take is about 6 to 8 drops to get that mega dose of approximately 50,000 micrograms or 50 milligrams daily until you bring it down to a fraction of that for maintenance, just to saturate the glands with their minimum daily requirement for optimum iodine nutrition. And I'm convinced that these researchers are onto something, because since I've been taking these high doses of iodine and high doses of selenium, you can only get 25 micrograms of selenium in Australia. And in the United States you can buy, and the kind of selenium I take 2 basic kinds of selenium. I take Seleno Excel, and Seleno Excel is basically selenium that's actually fed to yeast grown on rice bran. So the yeast is like a plant, and it sucks up the selenium, and after it sucks up the selenium, it actually becomes chelated in part of the yeast plant structure, and so when you harvest it, you've got the selenium bound to the plant of the yeast structure, and then you're able to get a much more bioavailable form of selenium. The other substance I take in the form of selenium is a product called S-E-methylselenocysteine. And basically this is the selenium that's found in the cruciferous family, particularly broccoli and Brussels sprouts. A completely different kind. Somewhere, I don't know if it's in this slide projection or not, there is a slide. I'm going to see if I can go there or not. Oh, by the way, speaking of milk, this is a 1940 slide right here. Dr. Ira Allison was a medical doctor from Missouri. In fact, he was called the Miracle of the Ozarks. The Ozarks are located in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. He proved that undulant fever, which is Bang's disease, was not related to the drinking of raw milk. He treated 322 patients of his that had undulant fever, which was a very tenacious, stubborn illness that was very hard to get rid of, merely with minerals. And the minerals he used was manganese, magnesium, copper, zinc, cobalt, and iodine. No relapses after 3 years in those treatments. And that this was associated with the work they were doing on Randall Farms. Those of you who were at the workshop today heard a lot about Randall Farms. This is the I3C, the sulfur compound that I'm talking about that shows up in the cruciferous family. It starts with the soil. And soil sulfur taken up by these brassicas produce these compounds called glucosylanates, and so far they've identified 14 of them. And these are just a few examples, but the ones we're going to talk about here are the glucobrassicin and the glucoraphanin. I want to meet the people who invent these words, because when you're up here having to enunciate everything almost in a foreign language to begin with, believe me, it drives me crazy who comes up with these names. Well, glucobrassicin breaks out into I3C, which is that indole 3-carbinol, which you can get a supplement for now. And if you react it with vitamin C, it creates this other wonderful compound that's good for preventing illness called ascorbagin. And if you react it with NAC, it stands for N-acetylcysteine, which is a powerful antioxidant and obviously has an amino acid in it. It creates glutathione, that tripeptide all over again. Now I3C, if you take that and you consume it, hydrochloric acid in the stomach, right there, creates this whole other family of things. Remember I mentioned DIM? at Louisiana State University being used to treat uterine cancer? There it is. So this is the stuff that is pretty profound. There's a lot of research on this. Another great website that you can read tremendous amounts of research on this is lifeextensionfoundation.org. You can become a member, lef.org. Life Extension Foundation is lef.org. Massive amounts of research on all of these things. Another compound that's very good for the cancer concern is an extract from the plant that you grow here in Australia quite bountifully called turmeric, and the extract is called curcumin. Ever hear of curcumin? Wonderful substance. Lots of good research on arresting existing cancer. Another compound from green tea. And it's got compounds in there that are called EGGs, ECGs, epicatechin galates. Again, here's the words, epicatechin galates. These catechins are these phenolic compounds found in the green tea. They make an extract out of it, and it's highly suggested that people that have cancer drink, a good amount of green tea every day. And then this last one is glucoraphanin, and this produces a compound called sulforaphane. You can barely say that one too, sulforaphane, and this is especially high in the broccoli sprouts, so you can actually even buy a supplement now of sulforaphane. So I think I'm going to cut it off right about now because I know it's getting late for you folks. You've been sitting there for a long time. I certainly appreciate you listening to me all evening. If you have any questions, maybe we can take a few, and then you're free. Yes?
Just a query, Jerry, it's pretty more to the people that taught you here. It's a fascinating presentation tonight. It would be handy to have a copy of the overheads on a piece of paper like we did today, so we can go back and reference it and do a bit more looking up on some of those terms and things that you...
Any way you can handle that, Colin? Copy of the overheads?
Anything's possible.
What's that?
Anything's possible.
Anything's possible. I'll leave a disc with the man in the back of the room, and maybe you can have somebody burn them if you want to. Yes?
In Australia, there's regulations that we're not allowed to have raw milk unless you buy it as injection milk.
Correct.
Is there anything that goes close to that, like biodynamic pasteurised milk? Is that sort of reasonable?
The question was, in your country, raw milk is forbidden by law, and is there anything, next best thing that would be ample? And one of the things you might want to do is you might want to get some biodynamic milk as an example, and even though it's pasteurized, what I would do is ferment it and make like a fermented organic or biodynamic yogurt or kefir out of it. Look at the recipes in those books and make a fermented kefir or yogurt. Now you've enlivened the product with what? Live organisms that produce what? All those things that were in the fermentation chemistry, and provide live organisms as well in the milk that are going to go inside of you and scrub-a-dub-dub. Yes?
Jerry, can you tell us the history behind raw milk being allowed to be sold in the US, in California and the like?
Yeah, the history, and it's in that book, the history started back in the late 1800s. There was a raw milk certification initiative that was prompted by medical doctors, physicians, starting in the state of New Jersey, outside of New York City. And the reason for that is because milk was a very big part of the medical prescriptions. Doctors prescribed raw milk to their patients. But at that time, around 1896 or 1898, there was a lot of controversy about the other dairies, which were what they call the distillery dairies that were in New York City. And at one time, they had as many as, if you want to call them dairies, 40,000 distillery dairies. And apparently it started with the War of 1812 with Britain, when the British blockade, closed off the West Indies. And the rum runners couldn't get the booze into the United States, so the distilleries popped up, And then when they started brewing or distilling spirits, they had all this slop left over, and they decided the best way to deal with that is turn it into an economic asset by feeding it to cows. And they weren't cows that were taken care of. Most of the cows that we were looking at as healthy were out on the farms, and they were eating primarily fodder. They were getting exercise and sunshine and care. In the distillery dairies, these are animals that were tethered inhumanely, of course, under very unsanitary conditions, not getting a real healthy diet, only getting this distillery waste. And so the animals were very unhealthy. And that's one of the things that came out of the raw milk meeting that we had a year ago in October in Pennsylvania, because there are people in Pennsylvania that don't want to be licensed as raw milk producers, even though you can get licensed, because if you are licensed, you can sell raw milk, but you can't sell raw butter or raw cream. And they want to be able to do that. And they're also, many of these people are of the plain folk ilk, which are the Amish Mennonite people, and they don't want to be dealing with more government servitude through regulatory involvement. And so what we found out, you know, Mark McAfee, we said, had some other people came out of there. The thing that came out of this meeting was that, and it's true, the most important thing to milk hygiene, the most important thing is animal physiology, the health of the cow. It's more important than hygiene in the external environment. Not that hygiene isn't important, it's very important. You don't want to throw manure and other things in raw milk. People don't want to drink shit, frankly, you know. That's what it boils down to, you know. But the physiology of the animal, if you're really extra clean and you've got animals that are malnourished and animals that are physiologically compromised, they are more at risk in creating a problem on the integrity of the milk than the hygiene issues are. And that's been proven. So what happened was there ended up becoming two movements. The physicians realized that they wanted to preserve this medical substance called raw milk from healthy animals. And so they created a certifying agency. Nationwide it grew. And the physicians themselves were the farm inspectors. They're the ones that approve the farm based on the cleanliness of the property and the stable, the health of the cows, the feed going into the cows, so that they knew that milk coming out of those animals was going to impart, you know, a healthy response in their patients. And so after the pasteurization laws came in, because of the filthy standards that were in these distillery dairies, eventually a lot of the states decided that, you know, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. This solves all of our problem. It also made for basically the centralization and consolidation of milk, because if you have milk coming from all these different sources, you know, how do you, in effect, differentiate and say, well, this guy's a really clean, grass-fed, you know, biological farming producer, and this guy is basically, you know, a toilet, you know? Solve that problem, all the milk's going in the same tank, pasteurize it all, and it standardizes the product so you don't have to worry about it as an industry. So what we're seeing is the raw milk movement in the United States is growing rapidly because people are getting well from drinking raw milk. Things like ADD, ADHD, depression in adults, asthma. The stories go on and on and on. People who start drinking this milk, how much better they feel, how their skin clears up. I mean, just a whole plethora of complaints go away just getting on the raw milk diet. Now, what's interesting about the raw milk diet actually was a medical protocol that was even used in places like the Mayo Clinic. You ever hear of the Mayo Clinic? Before it was called the Mayo Clinic, it was called the Mayo Foundation. It's one of the top cancer research hospital treatment centers in the United States, in Rochester, Minnesota. Dr. Crew was the medical doctor there that used the milk cure on something like 18,000 patients of all kinds of imaginable ailments. And it was a very intensive protocol where the patient slowly got onto almost exclusively a milk diet and would drink up to 10 liters of milk a day, sip by sip. And there were other things like detoxification, like sweating, it might be enemas or whatever. But that milk diet turned so many people around because it is very cleansing, because of the enzymes and the microorganisms that are in it. And it's very nourishing because it's loaded with macro and micro elements and those essential fats and essential proteins. And these cures were going all over these sanitariums. It's in that book. It's a very interesting story. So I don't know if I answered the question in its entirety, but it's a really, really worthwhile thing to do. And again, all I can do is encourage you guys to go home with some of the things I said I know are a little controversial. But in my book, anytime you're dealing with life and death situations, and anytime you're dealing with nature, everything's subject to debate and should be. But the reality of it is that what I find incredibly disheartening with the modern medical arena is that it seems to be very satisfied in business as usual, which is more drugs and less progress. So I thank everybody for your attention, your time. God bless all of you. Good health to all of you. Eat well and smile when you eat. Chew your food well, too.